Thanks to everyone for attending this session. And please welcome Christopher and Abhi. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming to our talk. Today we're going to talk about Chrome extension risks and you. My name is Chris Barcellos. I work on the Lyft Red team, and I break into systems and help teams fix issues.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abhi. I work in the product security team at Lyft.
Yep. And Abhi's actually more of a red teamer because he social engineered a red teamer into doing a non-red team project. So today we're going to cover some of the background of how we came upon this project. We're going to go through a few of the risks that Chrome extensions can. Can you hear me now?
Just talk a little louder.
Sure.
They're on.
All right. Is that all right? Okay, thanks. All right, so we're going to talk about the background of how we got here. We'll cover some of the risks of Chrome extensions, and we're also going to cover sort of our plan and approach that we took to mitigate these problems. Originally, there was some red team work done at Lyft, and we noticed Chrome extensions installed on different users' machines that we weren't quite too fond of, and that sort of morphed into how do we fix this at scale. So this is a challenge for most companies. You have a lot of users used to doing things a certain way. Now you're going to change it. You're going to take away their ability to install things. That can cause some sort of friction. So you want to sort of get long-term support from leadership and sort of have a good system for maintainability and ease of use. So some of the popular risky extensions that we ran across looking through our user base was these three sort of areas we called out directly. There's a bunch more that are out there. But in these cases, the first one is tools that do sort of productivity help. And they will ask for access to the user's calendar and email, and also sharing this data with third parties. Another one is going to be grammar and spell check tools. These things will need to have access to all pages to read and change the page. And also, in a few cases, they actually save what the users are editing or asking for help on to their third-party servers, which is a risk because they could be saving things like secure documents that you don't want outside of the company with these free tools that are basically potentially selling the data for profit. Another area is promo extensions. These are sometimes installed maliciously and sometimes by the users. These can be used for things like getting coupons or promos on different websites. But sometimes these tools can do things like ad tracking, malvertising, phishing malware, and things like that. And these are very, very common. There's millions of installs on these. This is an article that came out last year, and it covered a group of extensions that were found to be exfiltrating user history and then selling them. The actual research was called Data Spy, and this article dove into what the tool did and sort of how it was malicious. When the tool first installed, it didn't do anything. It took about 3 weeks, and then it would sort of download a secondary payload where it would then base64 encrypt your history and then ship it off to a third-party site. And then it would be set up on another site where it was sold to people who wanted to sort of find out what users were browsing to. This is a list of extensions that was brought up in this research, but the one that we'll call out here is Hover Zoom. This is a tool that was used for basically you put your mouse over an image, it zooms it out to a larger size. And even though that was a small amount of work that it needed to do, it asked for a bunch of permissions to do the malicious actions that it was set out for. On this one here, this came out a week and a half ago. It's very recent. There was a researcher who worked with Duo through the CR Excavator system, found a number of extensions that were bad. They found out eventually that this was affecting millions of users. And Google eventually found there was 500 in total extensions that were doing this malicious work. These extensions were doing things like redirecting to malware sites, phishing, stealing histories again. And once this was found and brought out and released, they had removed all of these malicious extensions from the Chrome Web Store. This is something you might be aware of when you install a new extension. It shows you which permissions it needs. In this one, the extension is a new tab picture, but it asks for access to different sites, including the Google domain, and also the ability to read your history and manage your apps and extensions. This is an example of what a manifest.json looks like. This is the file that's within an extension. These are all of the requests it has for the Chrome API. Tabs is, from a security point of view, it's one of the things it can do is pull out the sites that each tab is on, so it can basically get your history. Web request is an API that can be used to sort of capture requests as they're leaving the browser, manipulate them, change them. It could be redirecting users to malicious sites. Blocking is mostly probably used for ad blocking. This URL here is sort of a pattern for all sites and all URLs. Cookies, that's going to be all of your users' sessions. The history is just calling out directly the history that the extension needs. Well, one more thing about history. This can be a pretty big concern for most companies because the parameters in like a GET request, for example, it might have PII within them. It could be pulling out password reset links and then they're being sold off to third parties. There's been cases where these things have been indexed in Google and have had problems, but in here, it's the browser pulling it out and then reselling it. We did a very unscientific sample study of the Chrome Web Store. We could have written a scraper, but we thought we might hit some rate limits. So instead, we just went to the Chrome Web Store page, scrolled down for about 2 minutes, and then parsed the page for extension IDs. We got about 8,000 IDs, and then we ran those against the CR Excavator report tool, which we'll talk about in a second. And this is sort of the breakdown of what those 8,000 extensions requested. So some concerning things there. So this is the tool that we used, Duo CR Excavator. It's very useful for getting an idea of what your extensions are doing and also what the users have installed. It has 3 parts. There's a CR Excavator Gatherer. This is a tool that's an extension. You force install or push install it into your users' browsers, and then it reports back to the site and it gives you the ability to sort of collect what's currently running in your users' machines. The admin console and API, that's going to give you a UI to see what the users have installed and also do some configuration. The API is fully featured. It can pull anything you need from the data that's in there. A common one that we did was you give an email address as a parameter and you get a list of the extension IDs that the user has. You can also request extension reports and get the numbers from those, and that's the third part. So extension reporting, they've created a risk sort of system where there's points applied for different things. And here's an example of a now removed malicious extension report. You get multiple versions, so you can quickly see what's changed between versions. You can view the source. You can also see how many ratings and installs they have. And based on those numbers, it can give you different risk scores. So you can kind of see, like, is this a popular extension? Does it have low ratings? Have only 10 people installed it? Does it have a privacy policy? Things like that. It also will show you a list of the permissions that are there, and this is just part straight out of the manifest JSON, but they also give you the risk scores as well. So you can kind of see, what is this extension asking for and how serious is it? So those are a couple of the concerns that you might have with different extensions. We only covered 3 different areas, but there's a lot of other ones out there that you might run into at your companies. There's extensions that are built for doing things with GitHub, and it might give access to your source code if those were leaked. Your PMs could be using tools to do project management that might also leak like private projects to these third parties. But we'll dive a little bit more into that in a second. So sometimes when you install extensions, the first thing the extension does is ask for an OAuth grant. And in this case, a unnamed extension which does email productivity. So sometimes people want to be more productive, so they install an extension and then give access to all the data that their account has to this extension. So the extensions can do things like read all of the emails of the user. They can send emails, they can delete emails, and do other things. In this case, it also had access to your contacts. You can read them, edit them, delete them. In some cases, we've seen them have access to even Google Cloud project stuff, including like access to your infrastructure. But this is pretty concerning to us. We wouldn't want our contacts, calendars, or org charts being exfiltrated to free extensions. So something that most people don't read because they want to have an extension, they want to have it installed right away. They're not going to read all the privacy policies. They just want to hit a button and then have a cat show up in a new tab. It's sort of like they're as fast as I can push that button, get it installed. I don't care. But if you actually read the privacy policy, which we did in a few cases, just to have a better understanding of what these tools actually did. They talk about how they share your data, how they disclose it, and who they disclose it to. So even if this free extension that you're not paying for is a great company and it secures everything, that's something to say that they don't get exploited and breached and then your data is compromised. But then when you look at what they're sharing it with, the third parties, those companies can also be breached or be potentially malicious. There's also times when companies will have sort of loose agreements with other companies. Like they can say that we sell things or we share things with our affiliates, and we shake hands and now we're affiliated. So I'm going to share all your data with my friend here.
Thank you.
And we're not always sure legally what that means, but it's concerning because it's your company's data and these free tools have access to it. So you wouldn't want someone to share your PII with outsiders. So now we're jumping into the plan.
So, sorry about that. Now that we have talked about all the problems with Chrome extensions, let's briefly talk about what's our plan for addressing them. So on a high level, what that looks like is presented here. We start with gaining and improving visibility, which means you can't fix what you can't see. So you start with how can we see what our users are using, and exploring more into that. We define what's an acceptable risk for our enterprise, and create a policy out of it. The next step is actually enforcing that policy, and after that, iterating on it based on input from stakeholders. All of this while reducing support and operations costs, because we're also working on streamlining the software users across the company when we do this. So this was what we had in mind initially, and obviously the first step is improving visibility. In our case, that meant getting all the Chrome browsers into management. How do we see all the configs, all the extensions that the users has in their individual browsers? If you have G Suite and if you have Chrome OS devices, you're lucky. All of them are managed by default. Otherwise, you would probably need to use some sort of endpoint management tool. It can be AD if you're using Windows environment, Jamf if you're using Mac environment, to push out a policy, and that will bring that can be used to bring all the browsers in your fleet to management. That will also let you gain visibility into what extensions your users have installed. This is a sort of a sample architecture for the whole workflow. Like we just talked about, if we have G Suite environment, you bring all of them into visibility using one of the methods that we talked about earlier. We pass all of that data into CR Excavator, which is a tool that Chris talked about earlier, which gives you a risk snapshot for each individual extensions that you have installed in your company. The data from CR Excavator is then passed into some custom automation that we built in-house. The automation is two-part. The first part is cartography. For those of you who do not know about cartography, it's an open source project by Lyft that essentially lets you visualize your infrastructure as graphs. And we open sourced a module for CR Excavator this year, and which lets you import all the data. We use cartography because it lets us see the risk attribution, so which orgs within the company have highest amount of risk, so you can go ahead and tackle them in the first place. It also gives you an ability to see the risk over time, so like how many unique installs your users have at this point of time, and how much risk did we reduce. Like that kind of questions can be answered by cartography. The other piece of automation was around getting the workflow smooth. Like, if there's going to be a request and review workflow, can we give enough information for reviewer to make the decision as quickly as possible? Can we make it easier for the user to chime into the process? So all of that information goes to your workflow tool. It can be Jira or it can be anything. One thing there's a caveat with this whole process that you don't have a direct API for extension management in G Suite. So you have to go through a bunch of hoops to accomplish this. this is sort of a blueprint of how we actually reduce the risk for a Chrome extension. This was the earlier slide presented overall architecture. This is actual approach to reducing the overall risk within our company. We obviously collected a list of extensions that we had within the company after increasing visibility, of course, and gaining visibility into the entire company. And then we had this policy of what is an acceptable risk for us. And we also wanted to categorize them based on whether or not they had a business justification for keeping them, whether or not IT had contracts with the vendor, whether or not we have some kind of data privacy agreement with the vendors in place. We also looked at the risk score coming out of CR Excavator tool that Chris mentioned earlier. And we recommended a list. We went to some of the teams that had high risk and gave them all the details we had, like how much support and operations cost can we reduce with this thing, how software can be streamlined with this project, how much risk can we reduce with this project, and all sort of details that of the ins and outs of the project. And then we partner with the teams. We get leadership approval for the worst case scenario, in case there's a revolt, and we just don't want to get the leaders on board, but also the entire company, and we want everybody to feel like part of the process. So we give out comms early and often and let people have a say. So we heavily automated the review process, like I mentioned earlier. From installation request to automatically declining the requests that have already been reviewed and disapproved. We automatically decline them so that it dramatically reduces the operational cost associated with this. So if some fall through the cracks and come for manual review, we want to make the process as smooth as possible for reviewer with the runbooks, with the risk categorization, and so in general we want to make decision-making process easier for the reviewer if there is a need. So what does that look like for our individual user? So if you're a user and trying to install an extension that has not been approved or that doesn't have a business use case, and you're visiting Chrome App Store, you would see a pop-up like this. We would ask users to provide business justification for the particular extension that they're trying to install, and it comes back to the reviewer with all the information they need to make the decision, including business justification. We can automatically close these tickets out if the extension has already been reviewed, and whether or not certain risk thresholds are made. But that might be different from company to company, and we implemented this policy across. Initially we implemented this on 1,000+ employees within our company, and we're able to reduce the number of unique Chrome extensions by about 95%. This is in a very operational state, which required some legwork initially, but the operational overhead is very little now. We barely spend, few hours, and even less than that, maintaining this. So this is the approach that we took, but this is not the approach that you have to take. There are some different approaches that you can take for accomplishing the same thing, that is reduction of risk that's stemming from Chrome extensions. So some of those approaches are listed here. So the first approach is disapproved domains. That means you can create a list of domains that you think are sensitive, and you can block the extensions to be able to run in them, which means you can let users install whatever they want, but you have to create a list of domains that you find sensitive in your environment, and just not let the extensions run on them. The other approach is disapproved permissions, which means you let users install whatever they want, but the extension cannot ask for a certain kind of permission. So if the extension asks for certain kind of permission, it won't be installed on the device. Or you can follow the approach that we took, approving or blocking extension. Each of these approaches have its own caveats. Like for example, for disapproving permissions, we felt like the permissions that we can block from the list of permissions that we can block wasn't comprehensive enough for us. So if we want to say, we just want to block every extension that has a certain permission, we couldn't find it on the available list of options. Also, on an environment where you have a lot of SaaS tools or different tools, that might contain sensitive data. Keeping a list of disapproved domains might not be very feasible. So based on what kind of needs and requirements and risk appetite you have, you can use one of these approaches to reduce the risk. So to briefly summarize what we talked about, Chrome extensions have a lot of unknown risks that have not been reviewed in depth, particularly in an enterprise like ours. We had to uncovered a lot of issues, and then we had to dig down on what the risks from these extensions are. And there is a path forward. There's a path forward to reduce all of these risks, and you can decide on what method to take based on what your risk appetite is and what fits best for you. Obviously, this cannot be accomplished without support from your teams and leadership. So we would, the way we did it was partnering with individual teams and getting their leaders and team members to buy in. Here are some of the helpful links that we referenced in our talk today. This talk will probably be uploaded to BSides website, so you might get a handle of this later, unless we have any questions. We're about done. Thank you.